Hello, church family. It's Pastor Brett Stevens here, and I'm excited to look at with you at the Gospel of John today. And so I want to pull this up. We're looking at John chapter 17, and really there's just a simple question that jumps out to me out of this text, and that question is, where do you belong? See, this passage is part of a prayer that Jesus prays before his crucifixion. And this prayer is very powerful, very moving, and it reflects the deep intimacy that Jesus shared with the Father. And in this particular section of the prayer, he prays for those who have come to believe in the Father because of him, the Son. And he prays not only for those who are presently with him, and he refers to them as those whom the Father has given him. And he says, I'm praying not only for these who you've given me right now, but for everyone who will come to believe because of them. And so in this beautiful prayer, he is praying for us. 2,000 years later, he's praying over us. And his prayer is full of this contrast between those who belong to him and those who belong to the world. The ones who belong to him. Now, this really just centers around this idea of belonging. And this is one of our core values at Gateway, the idea of belonging, believing, and becoming. And today we look at the idea of belonging. What does it mean to belong? So Jesus says, those who belong to me. He also talks about those whom the Father has given him. He talks about them as because they have been given to him, because they belong to him, all that he has, that he shares with the Father, he gives to them as well. He talks about keeping them safe and guarding them so that they won't be lost. He talks about the word that they receive, about how the world will reject them. And so he says a lot of different things about what it means to belong to him. But at its core, what it means to belong to him is separated, is contrasted with belonging to the world. And so when I ask this question, where do you belong, really that centers upon this idea that we tend to naturally identify ourselves by our surroundings. So we think of ourselves as Americans. We think of ourselves as Hoosiers. We think of ourselves as being from a particular place or part of a particular family. We tend to identify ourselves by a profession. That is, the things that we regularly do. And so we kind of surround ourselves, and that surrounding gives us an identity. And so what Jesus is contrasting is the idea of being the fact that we are physical, fleshly, earth and blood people, and that we will tend to identify ourselves by all of these physical things around us. But he says that is belonging to the world. And so he calls those who follow him to identify themselves by a different calling, to belong to a different place. Some of the other New Testament writers will use this kind of language. They'll say that we, the people who followed Jesus, are aliens, are foreigners, are strangers, are wanderers. This is the kind of language that they use. What they mean is that we are people who are here for a time, but that this world, this nation, this city, this state, this is not our true home. We don't belong here. In fact, the writer to the Hebrews goes on to say it like this. He says, those who belong to where they live settle down and stay there. But he says, we are looking for a better home. And that's part of what it means to be a foreigner or a wanderer or a stranger in this land, is we recognize that this isn't our permanent home, and so we don't settle down. Instead, we're always looking to what comes next. And so this can be a hard concept to grasp because it is so intuitive and so natural. I mean, I'll give an example, and I want to be very clear with this example. that I am not saying that we should not participate civically in the United States. I'm not saying that we shouldn't value and treasure our country, and we shouldn't be thankful that we're here, because I think that all of those things are important. I rather want to comment on the way in which our nation has a natural tendency to teach us that this is our permanent home. From a young age, many children grow up saying the Pledge of Allegiance in school. And that pledge, full of words that they probably don't even understand, is essentially a declaration of their ultimate loyalty to the United States. Now, we as believers recognize that while we have a duty to the nation we are a part of, that we are to be engaged with our world, that our ultimate loyalty, our highest loyalty, is not to the United States. It is to the kingdom of God, to his reign, to his rule, to his way, to his plans. It is to our following of Jesus that we owe our highest loyalty. And so, again, this isn't to say anything about the United States or its value. This is to comment on the way in which we are naturally and intuitively enculturated into a earthly realm, into an earthly loyalty. And so it is something that we must push against and resist, and recognize that our highest loyalty is to our following of Jesus, and that sometimes those two will be in conflict. That there is no Christian nation other than all of the collective worldwide followers of Jesus Christ. That there is no sort of political earthly entity that the Father has chosen as his representative. And so our highest loyalty must always be in following Jesus Christ. And so the question of where do we belong ultimately is a question of hope. What is it that we find our value and our identity and our hope in? Because those who are part of this world and say, this is where I belong, this is my home, their hope is for this life, for the things that they can achieve, the things that they can attain, the things that they can have. And so for those people, any loss of what we have here is the highest form of evil. And so it challenges the very goodness of God to look at the suffering of our world. But for those whose home is somewhere else, all that happens in this life is, as Paul says, light and momentary troubles, not worth comparing with the glory that far outweighs them all. And this is what Jesus is very speaking about. He says, all that I have is mine. All that you have is mine. And they, the ones who follow us, will bring glory to me. And because all that I have is yours, the glory that is brought to me is glory to you. And so he thinks then of this glory, that there's a future, there's something better coming. And that is, in fact, the very ideology that led to the cross, that the death of Jesus was not this tragic accident or this horrible evil, but rather it was God's divine plan, that he brings goodness out of pain, out of loss, out of suffering. And it is only when we recognize that we don't belong here that we can make sense of the pain, the suffering, and the evil of this world. And so, friends, I think that's why this truth is so important, that we don't belong here. Because if this is where we belong, if this is where our hope is, then we have to do all kinds of mental gymnastics and lying to ourselves in order to make sense of the goodness of God in light of the evil we experience. It is a crushing reality that destroys the faith of people. And the only remedy to that is to recognize that this is not our home. And so, friends, I hope that as we come into this weekend, as we come gather together to worship, whether you're worshiping in person or worshiping with us online, that that time of worship will be a reminder to you of your true home. And I look forward to worshiping with you. Have a blessed week.